Yo, what's happening, guys? It's GM Cody, and welcome back. I'm back on camera. It's been a while since I've just done a face-to-face with you guys, and I figured we would do that tonight instead of doing another one of those history of hobby games or anything like that. And so we're going to do a review tonight of a miniatures war game. So I've always been into miniatures war games. That's actually what got me started in the hobby, period. I got into miniature gaming. Well, actually, I got into all that at the same time, but I think miniature gaming kind of took over for me, probably a little bit more so than role-playing did in the very beginning when I first got into the hobby. But like I've said before, I got into both at the same time, really. But I guess a little bit of my history with miniature gaming. So, like I said, I got into miniature gaming, role-playing games when I was around 9 years old or so. And, fooled around with it when I was a kid and then really got hot and heavy into it as a teenager. And, would play, Warhammer 40,000, Warhammer Fantasy, Gorka Morka, Warzone, so a bunch of different, miniatures games back then. Now, when I got a little older, probably around, I don't know, 18 or 19, I kind of quit playing miniature games altogether. I never stopped playing role-playing games, per se. I mean, I've had my breaks and down times with it or whatever, but miniature games I definitely have. And when I was about 18 or so, I stopped playing miniature games. I'm not really sure why I did. Something obviously turned me off. Probably the 40K players. But needless to say, I got out of miniature wargaming for a long time. So it was about, well, I guess not that long. I was about 18, and then what ended up happening is I went off to trade school when I was in my early 20s, and I came back and I started working as a carpenter. And when I did that, I actually, had a lot more money to spend. And I was like, man, I kind of miss painting miniatures and doing miniature wargaming. So a couple years went by and whatever. And then around 2010, I guess, I got back into miniature wargaming when I was in my 20s. And I really got into it. I became obsessed. So I just started playing everything. I got involved with a Warhammer fantasy group, Warhammer 40,000. I was playing Malifaux. I got into historical gaming, which I had always wanted to do and never could find people. And then finally I had found a group and still play with those guys too. And I got really, so that was the time I really, really got heavy into miniature war games. Fast forward a little bit, as the years have gone by, my interest haven't dwindled in miniature games, but I've done it less and less, it seems. And especially the past couple years, I really haven't done much at all. And past couple months, I haven't done anything. I haven't painted, well, up until now, I hadn't painted any miniatures or played any games or anything. So what got me reinvigorated to do this again? Well, I was talking to Eli. You guys know him as Elfbait. And he's also a miniatures enthusiast. So Eli, if you're watching, thanks a lot. And I started to get the bug again. Now, I used to play these big mass army games like Warhammer, Warhammer Fantasy, and Kings of War and stuff. And I didn't really want to do that again. I just don't have... I did attempt to get back into Kings of War, and I just don't have the patience or the time or the money or the space to do a big army game again. But what I do have the time to do is a skirmish game. So I started looking around for good skirmish games. One of those is Turnip 28, which I've briefly mentioned, and we're not going to go into great detail about Turnip 28 tonight. But that kind of started my interest again, about a month or so ago of getting back into playing miniature games. So I started working on some Turnip 28 stuff. And then I got started talking to my good wargaming buddy, Jack. And he turned me on to this, which is Planet 28. Now, he mentioned this to me about a year ago. And it's a really great narrative skirmish rules. Low model count, you know, anywhere from maybe 3 to 6 models. I mean, you could play with more if you wanted to, but that's like the regular game size. And it's very reminiscent of a certain grim, dark future game we know. But in a more old school style. So this is not so much modern Warhammer. It's more 1980s Warhammer. All right, with some other influences. And it's miniature agnostic, and you can use whatever miniatures you want. And it's a very cool looking game. I have yet to play it yet. But I started looking at that. And that got me really itching to play some science fiction and fantasy skirmish again. So I started looking at this, and this was my initial thought of what we were going to play. And then just a few days ago, actually, I found this. Space Weirdos. A Skirmisher Heartbreaker by Garsky Games. So this is kind of in the same vein as Planet 28. I would say it's almost like a cousin to Planet 28. It's a little bit different. Well, the rules are very different, but the ideas and the presentation are very similar to Planet 28. You know, it's like this kind of zine kind of fan-made, you know, rule set. I should mention that Planet 28 is free, and they have several different supplements and campaigns and stuff. You can download all that stuff for free, and there's a second edition that has everything basically compiled together and fixed. This is not free, but it's like $5 on Drive-Thru RPG or Drive-Thru War Games. And this is what we're going to talk about tonight. It's Space Weirdos. So I had the opportunity to actually play Space Weirdos yesterday, and that's the first time I'd played a miniatures game in a long time. It's been at least a year. At least a year. I think, since I've played like a real proper miniatures game. And so, you know, I hit up Jack. I was like, hey, man, let's get together this game. He's like, all right. So I went over to his house, and we planned on actually trying out both of these. And instead, we just settled on playing this. And we played one game of this, stumbled through one turn, figured it out, because we've played so many miniature games. And we absolutely loved it. Fantastic game. So we're going to look at this game tonight. And there's also a sister game to this that came out a little bit more recently, which is Sword Weirdos, which we're probably not going to look at tonight. If we have some extra time, maybe we will. But I'm not going to keep this as long as I usually do, probably. But Sword Weirdos is the fantasy version, and this also looks really damn good. And the same system, too, which is really cool. And I just printed these out, by the way. You know, I just did the booklet format and folded them in half and whatever. So, yeah. But I've yet to play this yet. We might try this out next time we get together. But Space Weirdos, man, I gotta say, and I've played tons and tons of miniature games and skirmish games. And there's a lot of really good ones out there. But for some reason, this game has me hooked, guys. So if you're a miniatures gamer and you like, you know, science fiction skirmish games, I highly recommend checking out Space Weirdos. And we're going to actually, like, look at it, you know, kind of do a review of this game tonight. And so, you know, this got me, before we jump in the review, this also got me digging through my old miniatures and trying to piece together war bands from what I had. So I've been digging out all these old, you know, old Citadel miniatures I have, like these Eldar Harlequins and these Chaos Space Marines. And these old school 1980s fantasy orcs, which are cool. Good stuff. Yeah, so it's got me reading through my miniatures collection, throwing together war bands for these games. But yeah, let's take a look at Space Weirdos. Switch camera here. So Space Weirdos is my skirmish heartbreaker. In RPG terms, a heartbreaker is a fixed version of D&D published by an amateur. In my online circles, a lot of old school D&D people are just rediscovering or discovering miniature wargaming and starting to write rules when they find the big name games too expensive and convoluted. So here's my heartbreaker. Some games might aspire to minimalism and totally get rid of anything that might require a token. Some games are more simulationists with lots of modifiers and rules for all situations. Space Weirdos is sort of in the middle, leaning towards minimalism but not totally embracing it. And I think that pretty much sums this game up, what it is. It's a very rules-like game, but how do I explain this? It's a lot more hefty than what it seems, if you get my drift. It is a rules-like game. The rules are not hard to understand, but there's just enough meat there to make it not feel like a beer and pretzels game, if you catch my drift. This is definitely not a beer and pretzels game, which I like, because a lot of these little like pamphlet kind of games like this usually are, and this game's like a real proper, it feels like a real proper like game, you know. So the main thing about Space Weirdos is the main mechanic is this dice shifting mechanic. So it uses D&D dice from a 4-sided die all the way up to a 12-sided die. That's as low and as high as you can go. And when you do modifiers, you know, either a positive modifier or a negative modifier, you shift down die types, which is pretty cool. I think that's very similar to Pulp Alley, I believe it is. Uses the same kind of system. And so it's a very cool concept and a lot of fun. And most every roll is opposed to some extent or another, even though it says opposed and unopposed rolls. Opposed rolls, you're rolling whatever your attack is or whatnot versus your opponent's defense, and you're always rolling 2 of those dice. So say your defense is a D8, the defender would roll 2d8, and the attacker's is d10, he would roll 2d10, and if he has any modifiers, say the defender's in cover, he would go down a dice step, so now he's rolling 2d8, etc., etc. You'd roll your dice, add them up, compare the two, whoever has the highest wins. If it's an unopposed test, like a psychic power, or if you're trying to recover from being knocked down or whatever, you would take whatever attribute or whatever, you know, skill you have, roll your dice, and then your opponent rolls 2d6, and you compare it against that. So it's still kind of opposed everything, even if it's unopposed roll, if you understand. So measuring is done with sticks, and a stick is 5 inches long and marked in the very center at 2.5 inches. And so all the measurements are done in sticks. Now, when me and Jack played yesterday, we did not use sticks because I didn't have any prepared. We just used a measuring tape, and you could do that. It worked fine, as long as you know when it says a stick equals 5 inches. All right. And I'll probably make some up because we're going to play this a lot more. So if you look here, here's the stat profile for your models. And when you make a warband, there are no set army lists in this game. You actually make your warband. You custom make it with points. And it's almost making like miniature role-playing characters, which is very cool. It might seem unbalanced and kooky to a lot of wargamers, but it works tremendously well. And it's very clever how the system works. And it's very quick and easy too. It won't take you very long to throw a warband together. And your warband's going to be anywhere from, I'd say, probably 3 to 6 models probably. If you created, you know, a lot of really cheap models, you could probably have, you know, up to 8 maybe. So not a lot of models, guys, which is awesome. So if you have never played miniatures war games before, I would actually recommend this game a whole lot. You could buy the rule book for, you know, $5, and then you could get yourself, you know, a couple handfuls of miniatures and some scattered terrain, and you're good to go. So this is a very cheap way to get into miniature wargaming, and a very manageable one too. It's not as intimidating as, say, trying to get into these big mass battle games and whatnot. So anyways, each of your models, when you make up your warband, is made up of characteristics. You have speed, which is not a die type. It's just a number, either 1, 2, or 3. You have defense, firepower, prowess, and prowess is your hand-to-hand fighting, and willpower, which is your everything else, like your resisting psychic powers, or your will to get back into the fight, or your morale and all that kind of stuff. And then you have weapons and psychic powers and traits too. So that pretty much sums up, what a profile looks like for a specific character in the game. So the way the game is played, and we'll talk more, by the way, about how warbands are made once we get down to it. Like everything else, every time I do an overview or review, I think you guys are used to this. I tend to go through the whole book. I don't read the whole book to you, but we're going to go through page by page and kind of follow along with what the book is. So when we get around to the warband section of making warbands, we'll go into a little bit more detail. So the sequence of play, how the game is actually played. There are 4 phases. There's command phase, initiative phase, activation, and maintenance. Now, this is not an I go, you go game, which if you're not a miniatures gamer, or if you don't know the parlance, I go, you go is I move all my stuff, you move all your stuff, and we keep doing that back and forth. I move all my stuff, I shoot, I do close combat, and then you repeat, right? This game does not work that way. This game is a alternate activation, so I activate one model and do all of its actions, and then the turn flips around to you, and you activate one of your models and do all its actions, and then it alternates back, and so forth and so forth, okay? So the command phase, you replenish your command points. So command points are actually very important to the game and add a ton of strategy and flavor to the game. So every army uses starts with 3 command points if you're playing a 125-point game, and 2 command points if you're playing a 75-point game. Any unused command points from the previous rounds are gone, and if your leader is knocked out of action, your leader of your warband, you gain 1 less command point. All right, and we'll look later how command points work and what you can spend them on. And it's really cool stuff. Initiative. So the way initiative is determined, you roll 2d6 for each player. Whoever has the highest activates first. Unless your warband leader has the tactician trait, which you can give traits to your leaders, and then they get +1 die step to the initiative. So they roll 2d8 instead of 2d6. If your warband is broken, either through losing your leader or broken by losses, you go down a die step for initiative. And if your warband regroup, you go back to normal, basically. And then you go activation. So whoever activates first, you activate a model. And that model gets 3 actions a turn. And the actions are move, aim, shoot, fight, disengage, psychic power, recover, stand, or use an item. All right? And so you can do multiple types of things with one model in a turn. So you could move, you could aim, and you could shoot. Or you could move twice and then shoot. Or you could, move twice, get into base-to-base contact with an enemy model and attack once. Or you could move once and use a psychic power. So you can do all kinds of things, and it's really fun. The action economy is really, really fun and tactical in the game, and I think it adds, between that and the command points, it adds a lot to the flavor of the game, I think. So movement, like we were talking about, you can move up to your speed attribute. Movement is done in sticks, like we were talking about, which is 5 inches. And you have to move in a straight line. which we got this wrong yesterday. I didn't realize this little point here, but you can't like break up your moves. So, you know, say you're moving this model, and I'll use my vape here, and say, you know, that's half a stick, and you hit an obstacle there. Well, and it's an obstacle that you would have to like really climb over or whatever. You can't just bend around it. You would actually have to stop there. That would cost you a whole move action, and then you would have to turn and use another move action to move around it. Of course, if it's an obstacle, there's you know, there's penalties you can take for crossing over obstacles and whatnot. But if it's like a big obstacle, like a huge like wall of a building or something, you can't get over it. That's what I'm talking about. So we actually played this wrong yesterday, but it's actually very important. Well, it says right here, a model may move over obstacles at no penalty. Climbing over a terrain piece as tall as slightly taller than the model generally costs 1 action. It says use your best judgment. Model that comes into contact with difficult terrain must stop. A model that comes in contact with an enemy must stop. And you place a movement token after you move your model. So this game does use tokens and counters, and I know a lot of wargamers don't like that kind of thing. And I typically don't either. But in this game, it didn't bother me at all having counters on the board. And especially with the movement, because you have modifiers for moving, as far as like, you know, if you move really fast, you're harder to hit, but you're also makes it harder to hit for yourself and things like that. It really adds something to the game that I don't think you can get unless you had counters on the board. So anyways, after you move, you put a counter on the board to signify how far you moved. So either 1, 2, or 3. You can make your own counters. They have counters you can print out that come with the PDF of the rules, or you could just use dice, which is what I used yesterday. So that's moving. Aiming. Aiming, a model may take 1 or 2 aim actions with the same ranged weapons. And it's noted on whatever kind of weapon it is. So some weapons can aim 1 or aim 2. And I think there are some weapons that can't aim at all. Each aim action adds 1 die step to the shooter's action if taken before the turn ends. Then that's aiming. And then shooting. If a model is not touching an enemy, he has a ranged weapon, he can take a shooting action. So like we were talking about earlier, you roll your firepower versus the opponent's defense and compare the 2 results. There are some modifiers. Like we were saying, you get +1 dice step for an aim action. If the shooting model has 2 movement tokens, it's -1, so it goes down minus a dice step. And the target model also gets some modifiers. If it has moved more than 2 movement tokens, if it has 2 movement tokens on it, took 2 move actions, it gets +1 dice step. If the target has moved 3 movement tokens, it can go up 2 dice steps for defense, which is really cool. I don't think I've ever seen that in another game besides maybe BattleTech, where you get, and I'm sure it's out there. I'm sure this is not the only game, but I think this is one of the few I've seen that gives you a bonus for defense for moving quickly, which is really cool. If the model is concealed by any amount of cover, it rolls its defense with another +1 dice step. If the target is staggered, which we'll look at in a little bit, it rolls defense with a -1 dice step. So anyways, you add up all your modifiers, go up or down the sliding scale, and end up whatever your dice are. You roll the dice. Your opponent rolls the dice. You compare the results. And then you look at this little chart to see what happens. So if you roll less than the defender, you miss, or equal to. If you roll higher than the defender, you roll on the under fire table. If you roll double, you roll under fire table +1, triple under fire table +2. So we're going to look at the under fire table, and this is how you determine what happens when you hit somebody. So you roll 2d6 and add whatever modifiers, either for the weapon or, you know, for actually like doubling or tripling the defense roll. And this is a really interesting part of this game. So you could actually have bad results on the so-called damage table. So you could see here, if you roll a 2 or 3, return fire. The defending model, You don't do anything to the defending model, and the defending model may immediately take a shoot action against the attacker if able. So it's almost like, you know, your shot actually like missed or whatever, and he gets to return fire. Snapshot. The defending model may immediately take a shoot action against the attacker at -1 dice step. A 5 is run for cover. 6 is die for cover, so you know the model can move away and take cover. 7 is down. 8 is staggered. 9 is down and staggered, and 10 is out of action. And again, we'll look at down and staggered here in a little bit. But basically, what down is down is not as bad as staggered. So if your model goes down, that just means that it's going to take an action for it to get back up. If it's staggered, it's going to take an action for it to recover. It's stunned. It's going to take, I think it, and he can't do any other actions for the turn, I believe. Down and staggered is even worse because you got to take an action to get back up, and then you got to take an action to recover from being staggered. And we'll look at all those effects here in a little bit. And then, of course, 10 or more, the model's knocked out of action. Fighting, hand-to-hand combat happens pretty much the same way with a few other different modifiers, like the attacker can get a charge bonus if they move more than 2, and they get a +1 dice step. There's not as many modifiers, but they are there, and it's the same kind of thing. You compare the results, and you look at the effects table, and you could have, you know, riposte and defensive strike, breakaway. It's very similar to the firing table. Also, it is worth noting that if a model is down and receives another down condition, it is staggered. If a model is staggered and receives another staggered condition, it is out of action. And that's pretty much how combat works. It's really cool. But it's also really simple to resolve, and it feels really good. And rolling 2 dice has a really nice curve to it. I noticed it's really nice. It feels really good. So now let's look at the other actions you can take. You can disengage. So if you're in combat with a you know, base-to-base combat, and you are basically in close combat with another model, you can disengage. It takes 2 actions to do so, and you can move a stick away. And obviously you can't like charge out of a disengage. You can't move into contact with another enemy model. And that's pretty much what disengage does for you. Psychic powers. So psychic powers takes 2 actions to manifest a psychic power. You make an unopposed willpower roll. If the roll succeeds, it takes effect as described. Unless otherwise noted, psychic powers require line of sight. To manifest an attack power, make opposed willpower rolls. Compare the 2 rolls. And it's the same kind of thing, except you don't have the under attack table. You can recover, so a recover action, the model makes an opposed willpower roll. If you make it, you remove your stagger token after a successful roll. A stand is coming up from down, basically. Use item for 2 actions. A model not touching an enemy model might use an item of equipment. If it does so, it may not use shoot or fight actions after. Likewise, if the model has taken a shoot or fight action, it may not take a use item action. Some scenarios have objectives where a use item action is needed. Like you got to flip a switch or press a button or use a computer console, whatever you may set up for that scenario. Maintenance phase, check for broken warbands. If at the end of your warband's leader is, if at the end of the round your warband's leader is out of action or your warband has half or less of its starting number of models, you have to check to see if it's broken. You make it an unopposed willpower roll for your leader, or if your leader is out of action, the highest willpower left in the warband. If you fail, your warband is broken and rolls initiative with -1 dice step for the remainder of the game. So that's how you check, see if your warband's broken. You also, during the maintenance phase, remove all movement tokens. For 1 command point, a player's warband can regroup and roll their next initiative roll with a +1 dice step if they're broken. Resolve any scenario-based events and return to the command phase. So you return to the next round. So here's the conditions. Ready. A ready model has none of the below conditions. Down model is laid on its side. A down model must take a stand action to become ready. A down model is not considered to be touching the base of an enemy model in regards to move or shoot actions. Staggered. Place a token next to a staggered model to indicate its condition. A staggered model cannot take any actions except recover. A staggered model is not considered to be touching the base of an enemy model, blah, blah, blah. And out of action, you're removed from play. And it gives an example here. Ready, down, staggered, down, and staggered. Command points. So we were talking earlier, every warband starts with 3 command points. And here's what you can do with those command points. You can hustle, you can increase your speed, you can increase an attribute, you can dodge, and you can actually like move your model out of the way as somebody shoots at them. You can do first strike. So if somebody charges one of your models, usually the attacker obviously is going to strike first, but you can use a command point to do first strike, and you strike first, and then they strike. Overwatch is just like in every other game. You can interrupt an opponent's movement at any point. Like say they're moving from cover and move out in the open, you could spend a command point, do an overwatch. Regroup. You know, you can regroup your broken models. And some of these you can only use once per turn. So it's pretty balanced. Like dodge, you can only use once per turn. First strike and overwatch. So, you know, there's some balance there. And there's a lot of tactics to using the command points. And you really need to use them. I used them to great effect yesterday when I was playing against Jack. And he kept forgetting about the command points. And I learned pretty quickly that that's a big part of the game. I think he learned his lesson by the second game. But the command points are really, really cool and add a ton of flavor and fun and strategy to the game. Of course, you can use, you know, your attacker can use command points, and you can declare command points in response, of course. And here we are into building a warband. So it recommends 75 or 125 points. Now, I'm sure you could play with more if you wanted to. So for a 75-point game, it recommends a 2-foot by 2-foot board, 125 3-foot by 3-foot. Yesterday, me and Jack played 125 points with both games, and we played it on a 2x2 board, and it felt great. So I don't think the size of the board matters. I would say at least a 2x2, but and that works perfect. And if you got 6 pieces of good terrain and some scattered terrain, you're good to go. You're set. So, you know, this game doesn't require a whole lot of terrain or a big area to play it in, which is awesome for me because, you know, I live in a small apartment. So, you know, I can just set up wherever on my card table or on the kitchen table, and we can, you know, we could play this game, which is awesome. And yeah, that's a cool feature, you know. So how do you build a warband? Build a warband with points. One model in your warband may cost up to 25, and that's usually your leader, but doesn't have to be. Your other weirdos may cost, your other people in your warbands, your weirdos, can cost up to 20 points. And so here you go. You buy your attributes, and it'll give you the points cost. For speed, defense, firepower, prowess, and willpower. After you do that, you purchase weapons. And here's the weapon profiles. So you can see, states the weapon, how many maximum times it can shoot per round. So how many shooting actions you can take with that weapon. Notes, you know, so like certain weapons have, every weapon has some kind of special effects. So like a, you know, the auto pistol is -1 to -1. -1 to your die type if it's out of range, which there are no ranges in this game either because it's such short distances. And futuristic weapons. It assumes weapons can fire out to any range, but certain weapons do have certain range penalties, and like pistols do. If they fire out to more than one stick, they go down a die type. And, you know, like the auto rifle has aim once, so it can aim once and it can fire 3 times. But anyways, I'm not going to go through every single weapon. But that's basically how they, basically how they operate and what the weapon profiles look like, and then how many points it costs to purchase that weapon for your character. There are area of effects, and so like the for the flamer, and I'm sure there's something else for the cone area effect, you just take 3 sticks and make a little triangle, and all the models in there are hit by the flamer. Blast is the same thing. You just you pick a target, and you put the center of the stick on there, and everything within the radius of that stick is hit by the blast effect. And close combat weapons are much the same, right? How many max fight actions, any kind of modifiers they produce, and how many points they cost to buy. One thing I will note about the weapons is they're not going to have every type of weapon you could think of. And what you kind of have to do is just use your imagination a little bit. I think there's enough general, it's very abstract and general here. So, for a good example might be, like, I had a guy with a power fist yesterday. Actually, he's down here. This dude. He had a power fist. And so there's no power fist on here, but there is a large powered weapon, right? Okay, so I was like, okay, well, that's a power fist. So you just kind of have to use your imagination for certain things. But yeah, I think, we didn't have any trouble finding a weapon that suited the weapons on our models. So, and I don't think you will either. Equipment. So each model may purchase 1 piece of equipment, and leaders may purchase 2. Some equipment is passive, and some requires a use item action. And you have, there's not a huge amount of equipment here, but the equipment really adds some flavor to the game. And again, this could be really abstract, and you have to use your imagination a little bit and be a little bit creative about, the equipment if you're trying to model a certain thing. But this is really where you can get the effects. So say you wanted to make like an alien, you wanted to make like the aliens from Alien, or like a Predator or something. Well, they don't have any like physical equipment, but you could just take the stealth suit equipment and just say that's one of their natural abilities and pay the cost for it, and that would give them the abilities like the Predator, or just be really stealthy or whatever. So, that's one thing to note. Psychic powers. You can take any number of psychic powers, and this is the points they cost. And it's a short list, but it's a good list, and I think it pretty much covers all the general ground of what you would think most psychic powers would look like. It's got, teleport and telekinesis and mind control and all that good stuff. And the psychic powers are fairly potent, but I wouldn't say they're unbalanced per se. I think they're fairly balanced. But they are potent. They're powerful. Optional traits. So your leader can take a special trait that gives him a little bit more flavor, and then your warband can take a trait. Now, one thing I did notice about these traits is I'd really like some more traits, but I think it'd be easy enough to make up some traits, and with an opponent, it'd just be like, okay, here's what I came up with for my warband and my leader or whatever, and is that cool? And you would play a couple games, see how it works, and if it works fine. So that's probably what I'll do, because there were none of these. I mean, some of them fit generally with the models I have, but some of them really didn't fit the flavor I wanted. So it's very small criticism there, but overall I think it gives a very, very decent selection of traits to select for your warbands, and it gives your warband a little bit more flavor than just being a bunch of power armored guys with guns or whatever. And here it's giving you, telling you to set up the board. Now, it recommends quite a bit of terrain, and I recommend that as well. But if you're playing on a 2x2 board, again, I think about 6 or 7, 8 pieces of terrain and some scattered terrain, you're good to go. There's not really a whole lot of different terrain types. You have blocking terrain, obstacles, difficult terrain, and elevated terrain. Line of sight is literal line of sight, which is fine with me. Gives some example warbands, which is pretty cool. Just it kind of something to model your warbands after if you wanted to. There's only 3 scenarios in the book, but scenarios are easy enough to make up. And, you know, you could look around the internet and, or if you have some other games, you could easily make up a scenario. And I would suggest making up, you know, your own narrative scenarios, and try to tell a story about what you're playing. And really, this kind of game really lends itself well to a narrative style of play, I think. Even though it doesn't really explicitly say it does, I think it definitely would do very well for that. And FAQ. And then, of course, it's got a really nice quick reference sheet on the back cover. So, that's Space Weirdos. Overall, I think this is a great game. I had a ton of fun. I'm actually kind of addicted to it now. I like, that's all I've been thinking about since yesterday. Is like, I just want to play more Space Weirdos, and now like I want to buy all these models, because you don't need a whole lot of models to play the game. So I can buy all these cool models, and I just need like 5, 6, 7 of them, and I can build like a whole warband and have some variety. And that's really fucking sweet to me. But anyways, my final verdict on Space Weirdos is it's a really great game. Highly recommend it. I think it's currently, not of all time, but currently my favorite miniatures game right now. And the bad things I'll say about it, there are a couple little criticisms. One, there's no campaign system in this game, which I found a bit odd, because nowadays everybody seems to incorporate some little one-page at least, or one-paragraph campaign system, and this had none in it. But I don't think it would be too hard to work out a campaign system. And in fact, Planet 28 has a pretty decent little one-paragraph campaign system that I think you could adopt for Space Weirdos. So that's one small criticism. 2, we already talked about the character traits and stuff, but again, I think it's easy enough to make up character traits and weapons that's not too much of a concern for me. And 3, there's no vehicle rules, if that's a concern for you. It's not a big concern for me, because if you're playing a skirmish game, vehicles are probably not going to come into play a whole lot. And I could see why there's no vehicle rules, because I feel like it might be a little bit difficult to do in this system. But I'm actually thinking about tinkering around with it just for fun, to do some vehicle rules. Because it would be fun in the occasional game, a larger game, to have one tank or a power armored suit or a dreadnought or whatever. So I might tinker around with it and see if I can make vehicles work for the system. But overall, as far as everything else goes, it's very fun, very quick, very easy, but very deep. Well, not extremely deep, but fairly complex, and it feels more complex and deep than what it is, if that makes sense. So go pick yourself up a copy. It's $5. I think it's a great deal. And so yeah, hope you guys have enjoyed this video. Just to let you know, I have been in the miniatures mood lately, if you haven't noticed. But that doesn't mean we're not going to be talking about role-playing games again. We definitely will. I just want to spice things up a little bit and talk about some more games besides just role-playing games. Of course, you guys know that I'm into all kinds of games. I'm a gamer. I like to play everything. So we'll be talking more miniatures games, and I've been wanting to inject more of that. And also down the road, I need to get it set up first before we can do it. But we might do a few battle reports on the channel, like some narrative, like battle reports with a couple wargaming buddies of mine. So look forward to that. I don't know when that's going to be, because I think I could do it on my phone and with just like a Bluetooth mic, but I'd have to get a Bluetooth mic or a couple mics to actually do it. But sometime down the road, I would like to do that. I hope you guys have been enjoying the history of hobby games. I'm not going to do that every week, but I'll do it as often as I can. I have actually been writing scripts for that one, and I've been doing pretty extensive research on that before I do an episode and write a script. So it takes me a bit of time to do it, and I don't want to burn myself out on doing those. So I would expect those at least once a month. I'll probably be doing one of those, if not once every couple weeks or whatever. So, other things that are going on. Of course, we're going to be continuing the Prowlers and Paragons game, and that will continue this next Sunday at 7 p.m. Central Time. Same place, same time we've been doing it. But I am also starting, and I didn't get the book off the shelf or anything, but I am also starting an old school Essentials game, OSE game. Basically, it's the old 1980 BX D&D. I mean, not basically, it just straight up is. But, for everybody else, they call it OSE, whatever. It's a really nice, modern reformatting of the BX system, and I'm a huge fan of BX. And I've been wanting to run an old school D&D game, been hawing and hemming about what rule system to use, and I've settled. We're going to use OSE. I've got the players together, and it should be a good time, so look forward to that. But I'm going to let you guys go. I hope you've enjoyed this overview of Space Weirdos. And sorry I've been a little bit rambly tonight. I'm a little bit out of it, just a little bit tired. But I hope you guys have enjoyed this review. And we will see you Sunday, hopefully. Y'all take care. We'll see you next time. Peace.